next year's general elections will signal the end of the Public Enterprises Department. A draft bill has now been published and is open for public comment. It seeks basically to create a new government-owned holding company for state-owned enterprises. But concerns have been raised about the independence and autonomy of such a holding company. For more on this, we can speak to Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix, Dr. Azar Jammine. Dr. Jammine, a very good evening to you. Always a pleasure to speak to you. So, is this a good idea?
You know, it's difficult to say. At this stage, it's yet another attempt, one feels, by the ruling party to try and resolve the SOE problem in a different way without going entirely private. There is a fundamental opposition ideologically to any concept of privatization within the party, and especially from among tripartite alliance partners such as the SACP and COSATU. And so this is a way of trying to get around that whilst still maintaining control over the SOEs.
And we hear now, basically, this is out for public comment. When you look at what government has put out in the draft that's out now for public comment, are they on the right track in finding an alternative that perhaps will function better than what the Public Enterprises Department was able to do as a shareholder representative, and basically improving the way in which government is involved within the SOE space?
You're absolutely correct to ask whether this will make any difference. And it's rather difficult to be affirmatively encouraging about this, for the simple reason that it still doesn't go to the heart of the real problems of the SOEs, which is the fact that they are not being run properly by independently appointed managers and operators. Instead, they are still being run by people who are in positions due to their political connections rather than their competence or qualifications. And this new proposal still doesn't hit at the heart of that problem.
I think about Musima Vuso, who was saying in one of the pieces I saw, I think yesterday or early this morning, who was talking about how what's going to be absolutely crucial to this being a successful alternative, for example, is constituting strong independent boards. Now, boards, by their nature, have been at the heart of many of the problems at SOEs, and some people have said it's political interference. Some have said the other problem is that in the appointment of boards, you have people who are included who come from a political background but don't necessarily have the know-how to be able to aid in the functioning of SOEs. So how should they deal with that question?
You're absolutely correct, and theoretically, the idea here is that you don't necessarily even have to have independent boards of the different SOEs. You will only possibly have the one board of the single entity in which all these SOEs are actually put. The question is, who appoints that board? And there is no assurance that that overarching board will still be appointed by people who are independent. Will appoint people who are independent, and that is, I think, the current weakness that is perceived in this new idea. We don't know whether the new board that will oversee this overarching set of SOEs as subsidiaries will be sufficiently independent from government itself.
And the danger that comes to mind for me, if there's a single overarching board, is that if it is indeed compromised, it means that more than one entity may be tainted as a result. And I wonder if there's not a risk here of perhaps compromising more than one SOE at a go, because a single group of people occupy that much power, that much influence.
You're absolutely correct that it could compromise other SOEs. Having said that, in the current situation, I think, as we see today, almost every single SOE is itself compromised in some way or another. So that, relative to the situation that we find ourselves in right now, the situation wouldn't be no worse than what we're in at the moment.
There are those, even in the ANC, the Youth League in particular, who believe that what's basically happening within the SOE space right now is that those in cabinet, i.e. Minister Pravin Gordhan, who's at public enterprises, are beating the drum of privatisation. When you read this draft, does it or would it make it easier for privatisation to actually happen within the SOE space?
Theoretically, it could make it a little bit easier for private sector involvement in the SOEs, especially if you have outside shareholders, which is one of the proposals in this, in the form of private equity companies. But the overarching control will still be in the hands of the government. And one of the suggestions that was made about 5 years ago by the head of Goldman Sachs when he visited the country was that we should solve the SOE problem by privatizing up to 50% of SOEs. You leave the government with a majority shareholding, but you have private sector investors involved who are interested in securing a return for these operations and therefore will of necessity be on the boards and will demand accountability from the operations of these SOEs. This is not as direct as that. Yeah.
But say then the public or private sector, is involved, but as a minority shareholder, how much influence does that buy them in doing exactly what you're suggesting, ensuring better corporate governance and more accountability?
There is no guarantee that they will have any presence on the boards on the boards overseeing these SOEs, and in that sense, there will be less ability to ensure accountability on the part of the SOEs. That is why the alternative of direct shareholding by private enterprises, I think, is still a preferable outcome. But there is incredible ideological opposition to such a concept, even if it's a minority shareholding from within the ruling party, ruling alliance.
But ultimately then, Dr. Jammine, this move by government to do away with public enterprises as a department after next year's election, is this basically an admission that the government or the department was a failure? And if a department fails to do what it was meant to do as far as being the shareholder representative or the department that oversees what's going on with state-owned enterprises, is it fair to do away with it altogether instead of replacing perhaps the people who hold office, who may be the problem, who may be the ones who are ineffective and not necessarily the department?
That is precisely the point that I am suspicious of, is that this may not see the end of oversight of these SOEs by people who have been appointed there because of their political connections and whose interest is always to try and get others who are politically connected, colleagues, involved to benefit from the running of these SOEs. And that's been at the heart of the downfall of the SOEs. Let's make no mistake about it.
Dr. Azar Jammine, good to speak to you, Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix. Thank you for your time.